The night in the snow, the wind howled like a wild beast outside, carrying sharp snowflakes that cut into skin like tiny blades. Jack Mercer sat alone in his small cabin, repairing an old mining tool by the dim light of a hanging lamp. The room was warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke and oil, but outside the metal walls, the world was nothing but ice and silence. This part of the mining colony was far from the main settlement, so visitors were rare, especially on a night like this. Jack took a sip of bitter black coffee, his breath misting in the cold air that still slipped through the cabin's seams. Then he heard it tat first. He thought it was the wind again. Low knocking sound mixed with the storm's howl, but it came again, sharper, more deliberate. 3 knocks in a row. He froze, every instinct telling him no one should be out there. People didn't survive long in this kind of weather without shelter. Slowly, he set the tool aside and reached for the old hunting rifle leaning against the wall. He moved to the door and unlatched it. The moment it opened, a blast of freezing wind punched into the cabin, making the lamp flicker through the swirling snow. He saw 2 small figures standing on the porch. They were thin, trembling, their clothes ragged and torn. Their skin was pale blue, almost glowing under the storm's light, and their long silver-white hair was wet with frost. Big, frightened eyes stared up at him, one pair deep sapphire, the other a lighter icy blue. They looked no older than 8 or 9 years. Jack's first thought was that they were lost alien children from one of the smaller tribes that sometimes passed through the colony. His second thought was that they were in serious danger of freezing to death. Without speaking, he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. They hesitated, glancing at each other, as if unsure whether to trust him. Finally, the older one put a hand on the younger's shoulder and guided her inside. Jack quickly shut the door, locking out the storm. Warmth hit them immediately, and the younger girl let out a tiny sigh. Both were shivering violently, their fingers curled and stiff from the cold. Jack could see that their cheeks were flushed dark from frostbite. "Sit by the fire," he said in a calm voice, setting his rifle back against the wall. They obeyed, without a word, crouching near the old metal stove where the heat poured out. Jack moved to the small kitchen area and pulled out the last of his bread and a pot of stew he'd been saving for tomorrow. He set it on the stove to reheat, glancing back at the 2 girls. The younger one was watching him closely, her eyes wide. The older girl kept looking at the door, her posture tense. It was the look of someone expecting danger to burst in at any moment. "You're safe here," Jack said, though he wasn't sure if they understood him. They exchanged a few quick words in a language he didn't recognize. The older one replied to him in broken trade speech. "Safe. Only for now." That sent a chill through Jack, and not from the cold. The stew began to steam, and Jack poured it into 2 bowls. He sliced the bread thick and placed it on the side. When he handed them the food, they took it carefully, almost reverently. The younger girl ate slowly at first, as if afraid the meal would vanish if she moved too quickly. Jack saw her hands tremble with hunger. The older girl ate too, but kept pausing to listen to the wind outside. Jack didn't ask questions, not yet. Out here, people carried secrets, and asking the wrong thing could break fragile trust. Instead, he sat across from them, sipping his coffee. Every so often, he glanced toward the window, through the frost. He thought he saw faint moving lights, far out in the storm, too steady to be just the wind. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe someone really was searching. When the girls finished eating, Jack gave them a blanket and gestured toward the corner where a bedroll was laid out. They lay down side by side, still wrapped in the blanket. Their silver hair spread across the pillow like strands of ice. Within minutes, the younger one had fallen asleep. The older one kept her eyes open a little longer, watching Jack as if measuring him. Finally, her gaze softened and she closed her eyes. Jack stayed awake long after. The sound of the storm mixing with the faint hum of those distant lights he thought he saw earlier. He had no idea who these girls were or why they were alone in the deadly cold. But something told him this night was only the beginning, and whatever was coming for them might soon come for him too. The story they couldn't tell morning came slowly in the frozen colony, the weak sun barely pushing through the storm clouds. Jack Mercer stood by the small window, sipping lukewarm coffee as he watched the endless snow. The storm had eased, but the wind still hissed across the ice plains, carrying with it a sharp bite of cold. Behind him, the two alien girls were still wrapped in the thick blanket, their silver hair tangled from sleep. The younger one, the one with the lighter blue eyes, stirred first. She blinked at Jack, then at the fire, and then curled closer to her sister. The older girl woke a moment later, instantly alert, her gaze sweeping the room as if to make sure nothing had changed overnight. Jack noticed her tense shoulders. She was still afraid, still expecting danger to crash through his door at any moment. "Hungry?" Jack asked, keeping his voice gentle. The younger one nodded quickly, but the older girl hesitated. Jack set out bread and poured the last of the stew into the pot to warm. The smell filled the cabin, and soon both girls sat at the small table. Eating quietly, they didn't talk much, just exchanged glances in that strange mix of silent communication and whispered words in their own language. Jack leaned on the counter, arms crossed. He wanted to ask Anita to ask where they had come from and why they were out in the storm. But he knew pressing them too hard might only make them close up more. Instead, he asked softly, "Got names?" The younger girl's lips moved as if to answer, but the older one gave a small shake of her head. "No names." "Not safe," the older said in halting trade speech, her voice low. Jack frowned. "Not safe from who?" he asked. She didn't reply, just lowered her eyes to her food. That silence told Jack more than words could. Whoever these girls were running from, it wasn't just some random danger, it was something that could still be out there, hunting them, and from the way the older one kept glancing toward the door, Jack knew they thought that danger could find them even here. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the metal walls. The sound made the younger girl flinch, and she dropped her spoon. Jack crouched beside her, picking it up and giving a small smile. "No one's coming in," he said. She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him closely, as if trying to judge whether he truly believed his own words. For most of the morning, they stayed inside. Jack kept the fire fed and worked on a few tools at the counter. Pretending not to watch the girls as they quietly explored the room, they touched objects with cautious curiosity: an old lamp, a faded photo on the shelf, a wooden carving of a bird Jack had made years ago. When the younger one smiled faintly at the bird, Jack felt something strange stir in his chest. It had been a long time since anyone smiled in this cabin. Around midday, Jack stepped outside to bring in more firewood. The air was bitter, but the visibility was better now. That's when he noticed them tracks in the snow. They weren't from him, and they were too large to belong to the girls. Heavy boot prints, half buried by the storm, leading toward his cabin and then turning away. Jack's stomach tightened. Someone had come close during the night, close enough to see his home, and then left. But why hadn't they knocked? Why hadn't they tried to enter? He carried the wood inside without saying anything. No need to scare the girls more than they already were. But he knew this meant trouble might already be circling. In the afternoon, Jack tried again to talk. "Listen," he said, sitting at the table across from the older girl. "If you're in danger, I need to know what's after you." Her eyes met his for a long moment, and he saw the battle in her. Mind trust or silence? She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the younger one spoke quickly in their language, shaking her head. Whatever she said made the older one press her lips shut. Jack sighed. He'd seen this before, fear so deep it chained the tongue. The truth would come, but only when they believed they could survive telling it. That night, after they had eaten, Jack heard something again, not the storm this time, but a faint hum. Far away, like an engine, he walked to the window and peered through the frost. There in the distance were faint moving lights, too steady to be wind, too deliberate to be random. They were sweeping slowly across the snow. Searching, Jack's gut tightened. If those lights were what he thought, it meant whoever was looking. For the girls was closer than he'd hoped. He didn't know if they were soldiers, hunters, or worse, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let them find the girls here. He turned back toward the fire, watching the two of them huddled under the blanket. They were still whispering to each other in their own language. Unaware of what he'd just seen, Jack decided then whatever trouble these two carried with them, he was already part of it, and he wasn't about to let them face it alone. The morning visitors the next morning began with an uneasy silence. The storm had finally died down, leaving a pale, dim light over the frozen land. Jack Mercer stood outside his cabin, boots crunching in the snow, checking the solar panels on. The roof, the cold air stung his face, but he didn't mind. What bothered him was the strange feeling in his chest. The same feeling he'd had since seeing those distant searchlights last night. Inside, the two alien girls were still curled near the stove. Wrapped in the thick blanket, the younger one slept soundly. But the older girl was awake, watching Jack through the small window. Her expression was wary, as if she too could feel that something was coming. Jack finished brushing snow from the panels and turned to go back inside. That's when he heard it low. Heavy footsteps crunching on the ice. At first, he thought it might be a miner passing through. But then a shadow moved through the fog, tall and broad-shouldered. Another figure appeared beside it, and then a third. 3 shapes emerged from the white haze as they got closer. Jack could see the dark armor plating on their bodies, the long rifles slung over their shoulders. Their helmets had tinted visors, hiding their eyes. These were no miners, they were bounty hunters. Jack's jaw tightened. He knew better than to run inside and slam the door that would tell them he had something to hide. Instead, he walked back to the porch slowly, as if this was just another cold morning. The 3 stopped a few meters away, snow crunching under their boots. "Human," one of them said, his voice muffled through the helmet speaker. "We are looking for 2 fugitive small, female, alien." Jack kept his face calm. "Not many visitors out here," he said. "Haven't seen anyone in days." The tallest hunter stepped forward, his black armor glinting in the weak light. "They are dangerous," the hunter said. "They stole something valuable, and they are not to be trusted." Jack almost snorted at that dangerous. The 2 little girls inside could barely stay warm, let alone fight anyone. But he didn't let his thoughts show. "You're welcome to look around the area," Jack said. The second hunter tilted his head. "We'll look inside your cabin," he said flatly. Jack hesitated just a fraction too long. "Sure," he replied. Stepping aside and opening the door, inside, the warmth rushed out into the cold. The younger girl sat up quickly when she saw the armored men, fear flashing in her. Light blue eyes, the older girl had already moved. By the time the hunters stepped inside, the spot where the 2 had been was empty. Jack hoped they'd gone to the hidden compartment under the floor, the one he'd built years ago to store supplies. The hunters began to search. They opened cupboards, kicked at boxes, and scanned the corners with small handheld devices. One of them stopped near the stove, where faint steam still rose from a kettle, been cooking for someone. He asked, "Just me," Jack said evenly. The lead hunter crouched and looked at the bedroll, his visor turned toward Jack. "You live alone out here?" "Always have," Jack answered. For a moment, Jack thought they might find the floor hatch. But the lead hunter stood up. "We will be back," he said. Voice colder than the snow outside. "If you see them, you will tell us, or you will regret it." the three stepped out into the white fog and disappeared into the distance. Jack closed the door quickly and dropped the lock into place. He waited until the crunch of boots faded before moving to the corner. He pulled up a loose wooden panel and lifted the hatch. Two pairs of wide eyes looked up at him from the darkness below. "It's all right," Jack said quietly. "They're gone." The girls climbed out, shivering not from the cold, but from fear. The younger one clung to his sleeve. The older one's jaw was tight, her hands balled into fists. Jack crouched. "So, they were at eye level. You're going to have to tell me what's going on," he said. "They won't stop looking for you." The older girl hesitated, then shook her head. "Not now," she whispered. "Too many ears in the wind." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but he didn't push further. He knew the hunters would be backhand next time. They wouldn't leave without finding something. He looked at the two girls, fragile but stubborn. If he was going to protect them, he needed a plan, and soon. That night, Jack sat by the fire. Staring into the flames, the girls were asleep again. Huddled together under the blanket, the storm outside had returned. But it wasn't the weather that worried him now. It was the heavy sound of armored boots still echoing in his mind. Somewhere out there, those hunters were watching, waiting, and Jack knew the snow wouldn't hide his door forever. Days of quiet danger. The days after the hunter's visit felt longer than usual. Jack Mercer kept the cabin locked at all times, and even when the wind howled outside, he listened for sounds that didn't belong. Footsteps, engines, voices in the snow. The two alien girls stayed close to the fire, rarely speaking unless it was to each other. Sometimes Jack caught them watching the window, as if expecting dark figures to appear out of the fog at any moment. He didn't blame them. The hunters had left no doubt they would return, and when they did, they would search harder. To keep their minds off the fear, Jack began teaching the girls small things. The younger one learned how to hold a mug of hot tea without spilling it. The older one watched carefully as Jack mended a torn sleeve on her coat. She didn't thank him out loud, but her eyes softened just a little when she put it back on. Jack also taught them a few human words. "Fire," he said, pointing to the stove. "Bread," he added, handing them each a slice. The younger girl repeated the words shyly, her accent soft and strange. The older one memorized them quickly, speaking them without hesitation. But no matter how calm the cabin felt, the danger outside never faded. Every night, Jack made sure the hidden compartment under the floor was ready. He kept his old hunting rifle loaded, leaning against the wall near his bed, and when he stepped outside to gather wood or check the solar panels, he scanned the horizon for movement. On the third day, he spotted a small black dot far away, moving across the snow. It was too far to tell if it was a person or a machine, but the moment Jack saw it, the older girl Lyra, though she had still not given her name, stepped away from the window and pulled the blanket tighter around her sister. She didn't need to say anything. Her body language told him she had seen it too. That night, Jack noticed the younger girl having trouble sleeping. She tossed and turned, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket. Jack crouched beside her and asked softly, "Bad dreams?" She didn't answer, but a single tear slid down her cheek. Lyra leaned over and whispered in their own language, soothing her until she fell asleep again. The next morning, Jack went into the small market town. He kept his hood up and his coat buttoned tight inside the dusty store. Miners traded supplies, their voices low. Jack picked up flour, dried meat, and lamp oil as he waited at the counter. He overheard two men talking near the back. "They're still offering 10,000 credits," one said. "Two little runaways. Can you believe it?" "Not just runaways," the other replied. "Word is there from some royal family on a distant world. Big scandal. People killed. Those girls are worth more than most ships." Jack's jaw tightened. So it was truth. These weren't just lost children. They were important. important enough for hunters to cross frozen worlds to find them. He paid for his supplies and left without saying a word. Back at the cabin, Jack didn't tell the girls what he'd heard. Instead, he lit the stove and handed them hot bowls of soup. The younger one smiled faintly, steam curling around her silver hair. Lyra's eyes met Jack's, and for a brief moment, he thought she was about to speak, but instead, she looked away, her jaw tight again. Later that evening, Jack worked quietly on a metal panel at his workbench while the girls whispered to each other near the fire. He could hear the softness in Lyra's voice, the way she tried to comfort her sister. They weren't just running for their lives, they were trying to keep each other from breaking. The peace didn't last. Just before midnight, Jack heard a faint sound outside. It wasn't the wind. It was the crunch of boots on snow. He moved to the window slowly, heart pounding. A shadow passed near the edge of the cabin tall. Broad and moving carefully, Jack stepped back from the window and reached for his rifle. He motioned for the girls to get into the hidden compartment. Lyra didn't hesitate this time. She took her sister's hand and guided her to the hatch. Jack waited until they were inside before lowering it shut. For long minutes, he stood in the dark cabin. Listening, the sound came closer, then stopped. A faint creak followed, as if someone was testing the door. Jack kept his rifle aimed at the entrance. Finally, the sound of boots moved away, fading into the night. When he was certain they were gone, Jack lifted the hatch. The girls climbed out, both pale and tense. "They're still looking," Jack said quietly. Lyra nodded, her eyes serious. "Until they find us," she replied, her voice low but steady. It was the first time she had spoken more than a few words to him. And Jack knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters returned, and next time, they wouldn't leave without a fight. The escape planned the night after the shadow passed outside. Jack Mercer didn't sleep. He sat at the table, his coffee cold, watching the fire burn low. The two alien girls were asleep on the bedroll, but even in their sleep, they clung to each other as if letting go would mean losing everything. Jack's mind kept circling the same thought. This wasn't going to end on its own. The bounty hunters wouldn't stop. The boots in the snow wouldn't stop. If the girls stayed here, they would be caught, and if that happened, he didn't want to imagine it. By morning, Jack had made his decision. They had to leave the frozen colony. It wouldn't be easy. There were checkpoints at the market, patrol drones on the main roads, and only one shipyard within reach. But Jack had something most people didn't. Old cargo skiff hidden in a shed, half buried under snow. It hadn't flown in years, but with work, it could carry them far enough to reach another system. When the girls woke, Jack was already outside. Pulling a frozen tarp from the shed roof, the shed's doors groaned as he forced them open. Inside sat the rusted frame of the skiff, its hull coated in frost. The control panel was dead, and the fuel cells were empty, but the engine block was still intact. He could work with that. By midday, Lyra came to stand in the doorway. "You? Leaving?" she asked in her broken trade speech. Jack wiped grease from his hands and shook his head. "Not me. We're leaving." Her eyes widened slightly. "Where?" she asked. "Somewhere they can't follow," Jack replied. That afternoon, while Jack worked on the skiff, Lyra stayed close, watching. She didn't speak much. But when he reached for a tool, she handed it to him without needing to be told. Her sister Sarah stayed inside, occasionally peeking out the window to check the horizon. It was only after sunset, when the wind rose again, that Lyra finally spoke more than a few words. "They kill my father," she said suddenly, her voice low but sharp. Jack froze, the wrench still in his hand. She took a breath, her hands trembling slightly. "My father. Ruler of House Saravain," she continued. "Bad men come, take throne, kill him. Kill mother." Jack set the wrench down slowly. "You're royal," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Lyra nodded, her eyes hard. They hunt us. Because we live. Because we are proof, she said. Jack understood now the reward wasn't just for lost children. It was to erase the last pieces of a family the new rulers wanted gone. He leaned against the hull of the skiff. You should have told me sooner, he said. Lyra's gaze didn't waver, could not trust. But now, you stay when others would send us away. Her words were simple, but Jack felt the weight in them for the next 2 days. They worked in quiet urgency. Jack scavenged spare parts from abandoned mining rigs. Lyra helped clean wiring and strip frozen panels. At night, Jack kept the lights low, not wanting to draw attention. He knew the hunters could return any day. On the third night, they heard engines in the distance. Jack put down his tools and looked toward the horizon. A faint red glow moved. Through the snow fog it wasn't the storm. They found us, Lyra whispered, her voice tight. Jack didn't waste time. We're leaving. Now, he said. He and Lyra loaded the skiff with what little food and water they had. Sierra carried the blanket they had been sleeping in since the night they arrived. Jack got the engine running. It roared weakly at first, then steadied. The sound would carry, but it didn't matter now. As they climbed aboard, a distant voice echoed through the snow. Human. You have them. Give them to us, and we will spare you. Jack tightened his grip on the controls. Not happening, he muttered. Lyra's hand closed around her sister's as the skiff lifted slowly off the ground. Snow swirled in the engines. Heat. Through the fog, Jack saw shadows moving. 3 armored hunters. One raised a weapon, but the skiff's thrusters kicked hard. Throwing up a wall of snow and ice, the ship lurched upward. Breaking through the white haze, blaster fire cracked in the distance, but none hit their mark as the cabin rattled and the horizon dropped away. Lyra leaned toward Jack. They will follow, she said. I know, he replied. His eyes locked on the frozen mountains ahead. But they'll have to catch us first. The skiff roared into the night, leaving behind the cabin, the storm. And the men who wanted to end the girls' lives, Jack didn't know how far they'd get before they'd have to hide again. But he knew this, he'd made a promise to himself the night they knocked on his door. And he wasn't about to break it now. The skiff cut through the night sky, its old engines groaning against the cold wind. Jack Mercer kept his eyes locked on the frozen mountains ahead, the only place where they might lose their pursuers, behind. Him, Lyra, and Sierra huddled together, wrapped in the blanket, their faces pale but determined. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of the engine and the rush of air. Then Lyra's head snapped up, her sharp hearing catching something before. Jack did, a faint hum. Growing louder, Jack glanced at the scanner. 3 blips, moving fast. Closing in, they're on us, he said. Voice tight, Lyra leaned forward, faster. I'm already pushing it, Jack replied, tapping the throttle until the engine. Wind in protest, the skiff shuddered as it hit a burst of icy wind. Snowflakes blurred past the windows. But the hunters were closing sleek black crafts built for speed. Cutting through the storm like knives, Jack made a choice. They couldn't outrun them, not in this old skiff. They had to fight, or at least buy time. He spotted a narrow canyon ahead, its walls jagged and steep. We're going in there, he said, steering the skiff toward it. Lyra looked at him as if he were mad. They will trap us, she warned. Jack shook his head. They'll think. They're trapping us, he said, but we're going to make it their mistake. The skiff dropped into the canyon. Skimming just above the frozen river below, snow-covered cliffs rose on both sides, blocking most of the wind. Jack slowed the skiff near a bend and pointed toward a cluster of rocks jutting from the ice. Lyra, take your sister and hide there, he said. She blinked. What about you? I'll draw them in, Jack said firmly. You stay out of sight until I give the signal, Lore, until you can't hear the fighting anymore. Sierra clung to Lyra's arm, shaking her head. No, "Come with us," she pleaded. Jack crouched and met her eyes. "I can't, kiddo," he said softly. "If they catch me, fine, but if they catch you, it's over." Lyra's jaw clenched, but she finally nodded. She took Sierra's hand, and the two slipped out into the snow, disappearing among the jagged rocks. Jack watched them go, then turned back to the skiff. He grabbed his hunting rifle and a small pouch of explosives from a storage compartment. The hum of engines grew louder until it filled the canyon. The first hunter craft appeared around the bend, its searchlights cutting through the snow. Jack fired a shot deliberately. Wide to draw their attention, the craft swerved toward him, the other two following close behind. Jack ducked behind the skiff as blaster fire chewed into the ice around him. He pulled the pin on one of the explosives and tossed it toward the river. The charge sank into the snow before detonating with a deep crack. Chunks of ice exploded upward, and freezing water surged into the air, coating the hunter crafts. One of the crafts lost control and slammed into the canyon wall, sparks and debris scattering into the snow. But the other two kept coming. Jack moved from cover to cover, firing quick bursts to keep them focused on him. His heart pounded in his ears, but he forced himself to stay calm. One hunter jumped from his craft, landing heavily in the snow. The figure raised a long, black-bladed weapon and charged. Jack fired, the shot grazing the hunter's shoulder. The alien roared, but kept coming. Jack waited until the last second, then triggered another explosive hidden in the snow. The blast knocked the hunter back, armor scorched and smoking. But Jack wasn't unscathed. Shrapnel tore into his arm, sending a sharp pain shooting through him. He stumbled, gripping his rifle with his good hand. The remaining hunter craft circled low. Preparing to fire again, Jack aimed at its cockpit and pulled the trigger. The shot shattered the glass, and the craft spun wildly before crashing into the canyon wall. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of steam rising from the wreckage. Jack stood in the snow, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. He looked toward the rocks where Lyra and Sierra had hidden. For a moment, there was no movement. Then the two appeared. Running toward him, Lyra's eyes widened when she saw his injury. "You're hurt," she said. Jack gave a weak smile. "Better me than you," he replied. Sierra threw her arms around him, nearly knocking the rifle from his hand. But Jack knew this wasn't over. The hunters would have sent word before they attacked. More could be coming. They had to move, and fast. He glanced at the wreckage. "We take one of their crafts," he said. Lyra frowned. "You can fly that?" Jack smirked. "I can fly anything with an engine." 10 years later, 10 years had passed since the night Jack Mercer fought the bounty hunters in the frozen canyon. The storm, the blood, the desperate escape, all felt like a lifetime ago. Jack's cabin still stood on the edge of the mining colony, though time had left its marks. The metal walls were dented, the roof patched in places, and the old hunting rifles still leaned against the wall near the door. But Jack himself was older now, his hair more gray than black, his hands rougher, his back a little slower to straighten. The years had been quiet after stealing the hunter craft that night. Jack had flown Lyra and Sierra beyond the patrol routes, delivering them to a safe port in another system. He had watched them step into a diplomatic transport under the protection of a small, loyal guard. Lyra had looked back once before the hatch closed, her eyes bright with something between gratitude and sorrow. Sierra had waved with both hands, tears running down her cheeks. Then they were gone. Jack had returned to his quiet life, fixing mining tools, chopping wood, and waiting out winters alone. It was a cold evening when everything changed again. The sun had dipped behind the icy hills, and the first stars were appearing in the dark sky. Jack was making tea when the low hum of an engine rolled across the plains. It wasn't the shaky sputter of a miner's skiff. This sound was deep, smooth, powerful. Jack stepped outside, mug in hand, and looked up through the swirling snow. A massive shape descended from the clouds. It was a ship, no, a palace in the sky-sleek silver hull. Glowing golden lines tracing its edges, the kind of vessel he had only seen in news. Broadcasts about royal fleets, it lowered until the snow whipped in circles around it. The hum of its engines vibrating through the ground. A ramp extended from its side, and two figures appeared at the top. Jack's breath caught. They were tall now, both dressed in elegant royal attire that shimmered in the dim light. Their long silver hair flowed over their shoulders, and their skin still carried that faint icy glow. Lyra and Sira no longer frightened children but women who carried themselves like rulers. They descended the ramp slowly, their steps graceful. Jack stayed where he was, his boots half buried in snow. When they reached him, Lyra smiled, not the small guarded smile he remembered, but one full of warmth. "You haven't changed much," she said softly, her voice now fluent in trade speech. Jack chuckled. "I could say the same, but you'd know I'm lying." Sira stepped forward quickly and wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened for a moment, then returned the embrace. "You're real," she whispered. "I used to dream you were just a story I told myself when I felt scared." Jack swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it hard to answer. Lyra looked at him with eyes that carried years of responsibility. "We rule our homeworld now," she said. "The ones who hunted us are gone, and our people are safe." She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a thin golden medallion. On its surface was an intricate crest-mark of House Saravane. She held it out to him. "This is yours," she said. "Our father's guard used to wear it. You may not be of our blood, but you are a part of our family." Jack took it. Turning it over in his weathered hands, he felt the weight of it not just in metal, but in meaning. "I didn't do what I did for rewards," he said quietly. Lyra's lips curved into a knowing smile. "That's why you deserve it," she replied. Sira looked toward the massive ship behind them. "We came here for more than thanks," she said. "We want you to come with us." Jack blinked. "Come with you?" "To our home," Lyra said. "You've spent enough years alone in the cold. Let us give you something warmer." For a long moment, Jack was silent. His cabin, his tools, his quiet life, they were all he had known for so long. But the thought of leaving wasn't painful, because as he looked at the two women standing before him, no longer the lost, shivering girls from that night, but strong, proud leaders, he realized that the part of his life worth holding on to was standing right. Here, he nodded once. "All right," he said, "but only if the ship has decent coffee." Sira laughed. Lyra rolled her eyes but smiled. They took him between them as they walked toward the ramp. The ship's interior was warm, glowing with golden light. Jack felt the gentle hum under his feet as it lifted from the snow. Through the window, he saw his cabin grow smaller, till it was just a dot in the endless white. Lyra stood beside him, her voice calm but certain. "You saved our lives, Jack Mercer. Now it's our turn to change yours." And as the ship turned toward the stars, Jack knew that the warm meal he had shared a decade ago had not only saved two young lives, it had brought him something he never expected: family, and that, he thought, was worth more than any reward in the galaxy.